So I'd like to thank the Israeli consulate in Houston for contacting us and setting up, allowing us to have Gabriel Eckstein come and speak to us about water management in Israel. This is something that they have put on and had a speaker series for a while, and they were gracious enough to offer the speaker to Texas A&M, and I jumped on it, of course. So with that, we were able to put together kind of this small seminar and have a visit from Gabriel today. And this was obviously started off by the Israeli consulate, the Institute for Science and Policy with the Bush School. Kent, where are you? He's one of the sponsors of this, as well as the water management program. So there's Ron. And this is something that hopefully we can build upon and have additional speaker series of bringing in outside perspectives of water management outside of Texas, and hopefully being able to learn from the experiences. Gabriel is with our law program up in Fort Worth. He got his undergraduate degree at Kent State in geology. Is that correct? No, geology. He got his master's at Florida State and his master's in law and law degree at American University. He's become highly engaged in transboundary water management issues, and in particular of understanding water governance systems, and in particular, he's been at the forefront of one of the emerging discussions on transboundary management of groundwater resources, of which there currently are no transboundary compacts. So that's something that's kind of interesting in working with them, of understanding how those are going to evolve and what those will look like when countries start becoming too concerned with, how should I say, binational management of groundwater resources. But today, Gabriel is going to talk to us about experiences from Israelis' water management in Israel, and how they've been able to, I would say, pretty much maximize the use of their water, very limited water resources in sort of developing and sustaining the nation. With that, Gabriel?
Thank you. Thank you, John, for that very humbling introduction. And thank you to the consulate and to the various institutions here that have arranged and sponsored this. And many of you know me. I am on the faculty here at the law school, and I've worked with many of you. But what I'm going to do today is not my usual shtick. I'm not going to be talking about transboundary aquifers or transboundary rivers, international water law, which is what I typically work on. And I'm definitely not going to put on the slide here, text from some legislation and then dissect it word by word like lawyers often do. That's not what I'm going to do today. What I'm going to do today is something which is actually a little awkward for me, because it is something different that I haven't done before. It's not a legal presentation or I suppose to some extent it's a policy presentation, but it's what I would call something very personal. I am from Israel. I was born and raised there. I moved to the U.S. Early in my life, but we went back and forth for a while. My parents are both scientists. In particular, my dad is a hydrogeologist. And he was with the Israeli Geological Survey for many years before we moved to the U.S. And I remember as a kid going out in the field and watching him do well studies. He helped drill many of the wells in the area of the Dead Sea. And I just remember going with him and his buddies from the survey. And I guess at the time, you're 4, 5, 6, you don't realize what's going on. This is just normal life. But over the years, I've gotten to appreciate more and more what he was involved in, what was going on in Israel. And so this presentation, as I said, it's a little awkward, but I guess it's coming from a sense of pride. I know you're not supposed to be prideful, but I really am proud of what Israel has done. And having had the ability to, stand by somebody who was involved with it for so many years. And what I'd like to do is to tell you a little bit about that story of Israel and the water challenges that it has been facing, and how it's overcome them to such a large extent. So I don't know what you all know about Israel today, but Israel doesn't have a water problem. It doesn't. Israel today produces 20% more water than it uses. They provide water in the Palestinian territories, they provide water to Jordan, and right now they're building reservoirs and containers for all this excess water. And I'll tell you where this excess water is coming from. They're producing more water than they need. And about 7 years ago, Israel declared they were in a 900-year drought, meaning the worst drought in the last 900 years. And today, Israel can say that there is no water problem, at least not for Israel, in how it's operating. Israel today produces so much water that it can store it for the future. The water quality is as equal to or better than what you get here in your taps. EPA or higher standard, same or higher standard than any European nation. It has a thriving, multi-billion-dollar agricultural sector. Israel is self-sufficient in fruits, vegetables, dairy, and poultry. Self-sufficient. Tiny little country is self-sufficient because they have enough water to produce all these products. Not only are they self-sufficient, this has created a multi-billion-dollar export industry, and they provide oranges and vegetables and all sorts of other products to the European markets and other markets around the world. And you have a very vibrant, growing, modern society. This is Tel Aviv. This is considered the New York of the Middle East or the Paris of the Middle East. Ranked by the World Bank, 23rd among all nations in per capita, that's backward, GDP, gross domestic product. Second most educated country in the world. This is a very progressive, advanced society living in one of the harshest environments around the world and doing so well. And I think I have a slide here. If you look at the where the GDP level here of Israel, it's rivaling that of France. It's above Spain, above Czech Republic, above Portugal, many of the European nations, doing extremely well. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, how can a tiny country, from north to south, 262 miles, 262 miles, I mean, think of where you're going to go, 262 miles from College Station. That's the other side of the country. From east to west at the widest point, 70 miles. If you want to put this in perspective, that's that little sliver of land right there in the Middle East. More perspective, that's this little country right there. Another perspective. At some point, you have to ask, how is such a tiny country, 8,300 square miles, roughly the size of New Jersey, 60% of the country is desert. 60% of the country is desert. The rest of it, the other 40%, is considered arid lands. I think 20% is considered marginal agricultural land. 20% of the country is marginal agricultural land. And yet they do so well. Since 1948, Israel averaged, their annual precipitation rate since 1948 has declined by half due to climatic changes. Fastest rate of population growth globally since 1948 of any country, tenfold increase in population since 1948. So the question is, how can a country that starts with this do so well, have such a great export market in agricultural goods, dairy products, and so on? And it just, as I said, as I was growing up, not realizing what was going on, But now as I get older and I think about this, that something behind the scene is something unique about this country. And that's what the story that I want to tell you about in terms of how they did it. And I'm going to focus on three factors, one being necessity, one what I would call a water ethic or water ethos, and the other one is the governance framework. The necessity part, I don't have to say much. It's desert. They need water. They've got to figure out a way. Early 1900s, you had all the settlers, or early Zionists coming into the area. And mind you, there was a large population of Jews in the area in there present. But when they all came together and decided, you know, we need to create a homeland for the Jewish people, well, this is what you're facing. How do you do that in the middle of a desert environment where temperatures in the middle of the Negev are easily 120, 130, maybe 140 degrees in the summer? In 1939, when the British were controlling the region, they did an estimate of the carrying capacity of the territory. 1.8, maybe if we stretch it, 2 million people. They said that's the absolute maximum because the resources, and really they're focusing on water resources, that's all they thought would hold for that entire, for that region. And so the first people who were setting up the country of Israel, 1948, they knew that something had to be done, some forward thinking. They had to have some visionaries. And I have to say, we as a species, we're very reactionary. We usually don't react until something hits us in the face, some massive drought. Well, the massive drought was in 2008, 9, 10. That's that 900-year drought that really started to hit Israel badly. They were planning for this 60 years in advance, back in 1948 when the country became a country, knowing that at some point the population is going to grow, the economy is going to grow, we're going to need more water. And this is what's unique about the people in Israel is that they actually did think ahead that far and make decisions that have had such incredible impacts. And I'm going to talk about those impacts. So the first part is necessity. The second point is the water ethic, and then I'm going to focus primarily on the governance in a little bit. But the water ethic, I don't know how to explain a water ethic. The idea that you hold water in some kind of regard, that you know that you have to conserve it, protect it, use it carefully, and be smart in your decisions. In the Israeli culture, in the Jewish culture, the Israeli culture, Zionist culture, there's something ingrained in that society that so reveres water that every school child knows that when you brush your teeth, you don't leave the tap running. You just don't. And in fact, I remember the way I was taught to brush my teeth. I had a glass of water, glass this big, fill it up, and that's what you brush your teeth with. I mean, and that was normal. That was typical. I'll give you another example. There's a nursery rhyme. What's the American version of the nursery rhyme about water and rain? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Rain, rain, go away. Come again another day. What does that tell a child? What does it tell an adult? We don't want water. We don't want rain. Go away, right? I'll come back to this. Well, I was going to show you, this is another slide of early, this is even before the state of Israel. This is a city of Hulon, which is now a suburb of Tel Aviv. And this is, a tent city. Keep this image in your mind. I'm going to come back to it a little later. But Geshem, Geshem, Mishamayim, Kol Hayom, Tipot Hamayim, Tif, Tif, Taf, Tif, Tif, Taf, Mechu Kol Kaf al Kaf. Rain falls from the sky, drops of water all day long, drip, drip, drop, drip, drip, drop. Clap your hands together. Celebrate rain, celebrate water. It's some core essence of Israelis, Jews. There's this notion about water that it's almost sacred. And maybe it is sacred. If you open the Bible and look at all the places where it talks about water. You'll be counting well over 600 places in the Bible where it talks about water or rain or dew. Something in the culture, in the people, that goes back hundreds of years that I don't know how else to explain it, that it's just part of the very lifestyle of the people. Around the country, this is typical. These are signs, Chaval al kol tipa, it's a pity to waste water. And you see it everywhere. Just signs that remind you constantly that you need to conserve and protect water and be careful with something this important. This one, the root of life. That's what the sign says. So you have to be careful about it and protect it. Anybody recognize this person? Famous model, world famous model, Bar Raffaelli. I don't know if any of you follow modeling or. This is one of the highest paid models in the world today. I don't know if you can see in the picture what's going on with her face here. This is a public service announcement in about 6-8 years ago when they announced this 900-year drought. All these superstars in Israel, models, actors, authors, and so on, they volunteered for a series of public service announcements to tell the public that you need to conserve, you need to protect the water resource, just as a reminder to keep that ethic, keep that understanding going. And this is voluntary, not getting paid. This is you can find these on YouTube, but this is part of the ethos that every citizen of Israel feels that they are obligated to have a part, to have a role in protecting water resources. So that's necessity and water ethos, which I think are at the core of how Israel really developed into this water powerhouse. I'm going to move over to water governance because I think that's the one that seems to is most tangible in terms of how did Israel really do it. But I will tell you, without these two, something to force the people, that create that necessity, without having that core understanding that you have to conserve and do something about the situation with water, the governance I don't think would have happened, because we have good governance here in the U.S. But then we also have the situation in California and situations in Texas where, in the last couple of years we have towns running out of water, and I don't know, it doesn't always seem to work as well as it does, in my opinion, as it does in Israel. So in terms of water governance, there's 3 points that I want to make, but one of which is that how critically important water is, how it's acknowledged in the governance system, the prioritization that the government makes and the population makes for water, and priorities in terms of how it's going to be used, and then the space that the country creates for innovation. So in terms of this recognizing the importance and prioritization, water in Israel is owned by the public. Everybody owns it. It's managed by the government on behalf of the people, which is the case in almost every state in the country here. The difference is in the U.S., in every state, we issue water rights. So the right itself becomes a property, a thing of property that you own. And under our Constitution in the United States, state constitution and federal, we have the clause that says that the government shall not take your private property without just compensation, meaning the government can't come back and take that right away unless they pay for it. And they can do it under eminent domain, but they have to pay for it. In Israel, when they issue water, it's under a license or concession, meaning that If the situation changes and priorities change, the government does have the ability to make changes in who has the water. And the concessions are renewable every year. Or sometimes it's every couple years, but no more than 2 or 3 year license. So it's a renewable period, and so it allows the government to reassess. By the way, I'm saying government. It's not a ministry. It's not a unit under a ministry. It's an independent water authority that is not beholden to any governmental unit, not to agriculture, not to land use, not to any other department, except its own mandate of managing the water resources on behalf of the public. So if folks in agriculture are upset because they're not getting enough water or they need more, that's not their priority. Their priority is to balance agriculture with municipal use, with industrial use, with environmental protection. That's their priority. And they are not subject to the pressure that you often see where a decision-making body like that is under one ministry or another. Some years ago, they did have this division under agriculture, then Ministry of Interior, and it kept getting shuffled back and forth between ministries. Eventually, they took it out of the government in the sense of out of a ministries. It's still governmental, but it's independent. By the way, 1980s, remember Margaret Thatcher and the Thatcherite model of privatization? Much of the world followed that model of privatizing all sorts of national units. Israel started effectively as a socialist country. 1980s, they decided, you know what, we're going to follow that Thatcherite model and privatize everything. Electricity, utilities, banking, except water. That's the one thing that they kept as a governmental managed entity, because they knew there's something different about water, something special about water that has to be managed by the public for the public. One last point, which I think is really very interesting when you think about governance. This is not a socialism type of government management of water. Yes, it's publicly run and managed through this agency with full market pricing. Not regulation of the pricing, not kind of governmental control, full market pricing. What the actual cost of the water to either it's manufactured or delivered or produced or pumped from the ground or what, that's the price. That's the price it's sold at. There are some subsidies that go to certain actors, but that comes out from a different budget. That doesn't come from the water authority. The full cost pricing, all the fees that every homeowner or every farmer or every manufacturer pays, that money goes right to the authority, and they use that to maintain the system and improve the system constantly. So this is where you have sort of this public model of management married to this capitalistic market approach in terms of creating a market value for the water. And it's the only place I've seen where you have that kind of a system. And it works rather well. We've tried a market approach in various parts of the United States in terms of creating markets for trading water rights, and it's been very messy. It's been very complicated because water rights are protected under various regulations and they're restricted under various regulations. And it's been very much a challenge to create those markets for water rights. In Israel, you don't have that mess because it's just whatever the market price of the water, which has become quite efficient. One of the things that it's done is it's helped the agricultural sector decide what to grow. And in the 1980s, Israel was still growing these very, very thirsty citrus crops. And as they've implemented more of this full market cost measures, the farmers decide, it makes more sense to grow other produce, other crops. And as I said, Israel has a very diverse agricultural sector, and not just, it's not one single crop. Very diverse, and the farmers are able to make their own decision in terms of what they want to grow in relation to what they can sell their produce for, in relation to what the price of water and other inputs into the production cost. So that's those first 2 points in terms of the importance of water and the prioritization of water. This last part deals with, that's just a picture of the Knesset and Parliament. So this last part deals with the space for ingenuity and innovation in Israel. One of the things that Israel does, and does particularly well, is encourage its citizens to be creative. Even though it has these socialist origins, it has a very dynamic capitalist ideal for having people create their own businesses, their own industries, their own inventions. If you qualify, you can get 85% of your R&D costs covered for 2 years by the government. All you have to do is apply. You have to have a business plan, you have to have the idea, the product, the technology, or whatever it is that you're developing. They will cover 85% of your R&D costs for 2 years. In addition, they will do everything but twist your arm to find you, for you to find, or they will find you a partner in the community to test your product. So in the water sector, they will take you to a bunch of municipalities, they'll try to pair you up, and you will take your product or your technology or your new management technique, and you'll be able to implement it. And if it fails, okay, it fails. What are they out? They're out that 85% of your R&D for the 2 years. If it succeeds, then they put you with a second and a third. Remember, you're a private sector. You're in the private sector. They're helping you get business. You're making money. If you've succeeded in that first municipality, they'll take you to the second and third. You're growing your business. And Israel's getting a benefit from this new technology. And in fact, they will help you go global. Israel right now does business in the water sector with over 150 nations around the world. Why is that important? Because Israel doesn't have diplomatic relations with 150 countries. They don't have commercial relations with 150 countries, and yet those private sector, once they got energized, helped along, and then let go on their own, they were already standing tall. They're able to work with countries all over the world, and many countries with which Israel isn't always friendly with. And they've done this very successfully. I'm going to highlight 3 particular technologies. Drip irrigation is probably the one most everybody knows. Around the world, about 70% of water used or extracted from lakes, rivers, and aquifers goes straight to agriculture. 20% goes to industry, and about 10% goes to municipal domestic use. Most of the world, that 70%, most of the world flood irrigates. Flood irrigation is where you flood the field. That's how you water the crops, right? Somewhere around 50, 60, 70% of that water evaporates or infiltrates into the soil. I suppose if it's infiltrating, it's not lost per se, it goes to the aquifer, but it's certainly not going into the crops. There's another technology, the sprayers, the big sprinklers. Estimates are that they only lose about 1/3 of the water to evaporation and infiltration. Drip irrigation has been shown to have a loss rate of about as low as 4%. As low as 4%. Drip irrigation is where you have these pipes. They can be PVC, they can be some kind of rubberized plastic, and pinholes right at the root where each plant is located. and water flows just to that plant, and they adjust the volume of the water based on the plant, knowing about how much water that each plant needs. And surprisingly, when they developed this technology, they also realized approximately 15% crop yield improvement over flood irrigation. And this is something that was unexpected, but an extra benefit. Notice also, if you can tell, the soil here, this is desert. This is about 125-degree heat. Now, you have to find some heat-tolerant plants, but that's not that difficult. When they get the constant drip, they're able to tolerate and grow and thrive and have that extra yield. The next evolution in these technologies, which I'll show you a picture in a little bit. One was where they added sort of plastic, I guess it's like greenhouses, and they've actually reduced the evaporation even further, and they're able to grow them in sort of like these plastic greenhouses that still get the aeration, but they reduce the water loss even further, and crop production is even better. And the latest developments in drip irrigation is where they have sensors at the plants, at the roots, at each plant that test for soil moisture and the chemistry to know if you need to irrigate. They can actually irrigate through these pipes. And they now can control to the point where they don't send the water to every plant. They only send it to the plant that needs water based on these sensors. This is the next level of technology that is being developed right now in terms of drip irrigation. The second technology I wanted to highlight, just a couple other pictures. This is and you have really hard to see in this top picture. This is just dirt and rock desert. 1959, 79 already, when drip irrigation was really implemented in the 60s and 70s, really started big. Here you can see that they started to cover them with these plastic sheets on top of the irrigation fields. This is today. This is the kibbutz, Ein Yahav, and major agricultural sector right here around this kibbutz. And if you look at the terrain here, this looks like West Texas, right? And it's a thriving agricultural environment. So I said the next technology I wanted to highlight is wastewater treatment plant, operations. This is Shafdan in just south of Tel Aviv. It's the largest treatment plant in Israel. It is what you think it is. Wastewater, that stuff that comes out your toilet, out of your shower, it's got to go somewhere, right? What do we do with it here in the U.S.? We treat it and then put it back into nature, right? Well, in Israel, in the 1950s and 60s, they already started thinking, you know what, we're throwing water out. Yeah, it's with all that other sewage stuff, but we're throwing good water out. There's got to be a way to extract it in a way that we can make that water usable. Now, I know everybody's thinking the yuck factor. They don't make Israelis drink this, even though the water that comes out of here is absolutely drinkable. Absolutely drinkable. But because of the yuck factor, they decide, you know what, we won't do that. This goes straight to agriculture. And they've done hundreds and hundreds of tests to show that there's nothing in the water and there's no impact on the agriculture grown with this water. In this particular plant, there's 17 municipalities that have signed on contractually to have their waste delivered here and processed through the system. 60% of agriculture in the Negev Desert is treated with this particular water source. Remember I said 70% of water around the world goes to agriculture? 10% of water used around the world goes to municipal use? What would happen if you reduced that 70% to 65%, 60%? You're creating almost double the amount of water that you need for the population for municipal and domestic use. It's a huge source of water. Huge source of water. That's exactly what they've done here with recycling. Today, Israel recycles 86% of its sewage, and it's slated to go to 95% by the year 2025. Just by comparison, Spain is a distant 19%, and in the US, we're at around 5 or 6% in terms of how percentage of our wastewater that we recycle. The third technology I wanted to highlight is, it's not invented in Israel, but I would argue that it certainly has been perfected to some extent in Israel, and that's desalination. Desalination is, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar. You're taking saline water, ocean water, or saline water from groundwater, saline groundwater, and you are taking out the salts and using the fresh water. Up until about 15, 20 years ago, the price was exorbitant, $2, $3, $4 per cubic meter, which is really just, it doesn't make economic sense when you can, pump water out of the ground or from river, and just your infrastructure cost is 20 cents per cubic meter, 30 cents. It just was not economical at $2, $3, $4 per cubic meter. In the last 10 years, 15 years, Israel has brought this down to under 50 cents per cubic meters. The Solic plant, I think, operates at around 55, 56 cents. And the reason why this one's a little bit more expensive, do you see the ocean here? No, you don't. It's a mile away. They put in a long pipe from the ocean to bring it inland. Why? They wanted to save the beach. They didn't want to put this on the beach. And so it's a little extra cost to pump the water. But this is one of 5 major desalination plants that Israel is using. This one in particular is so big, it can supply about 20% of Israeli households that domestic use water. They're not operating at full capacity right now, but this is their potential capacity. As I said earlier, Israel's already producing more water than it actually uses. By the way, in terms of, if anybody is interested in the cost factors, Israeli households pay about $30 a month for the water. Just for the water, not, if you think about your bill when you get for water and sewage, just the water amount. I don't know how much you all pay for your water, but Israelis pay about $30 per month. In Las Vegas, it's around $50. In Los Angeles, it's about $60 just for the water per month. So this has become extremely economical in relation to the source of water and how it's being produced. So these are the main technologies I wanted to highlight. There's a host of other technologies. As I said, Israel companies are doing business with dozens and dozens and dozens of countries around the world. There are technologies now where they have these meters that or sensors they've attached to water meters and to different places along the system, and they now know that you have a leak before you know you have a leak. The sensors are attached to your meter at your home and maybe to some other parts of the system, and there's a centralized office that kind of keeps track of this. They actually make profiles of every household user or municipal user or industrial user, and if they see any anomaly on a daily or monthly basis, they immediately check it out. And most people don't look at it as Big Brother. Most people look at it as, wow, they just saved me an extra $10, $20, $30, $50 because they caught the leak and it has been going on for 2 weeks and I've been wasting all this water. The vast, vast majority of Israelis are completely on board with this kind of tracking and monitoring. They also have now robot technology, little drones that they will send into the sewers. They will send into water delivery pipes, and they look for cracks. And they will now fix the pipes before they start leaking. They will actually replace the pipes. I don't know, if you see what's, watch around the big cities, Chicago, New York, where the infrastructure is 100 years old, and all of a sudden you get this water main break or something and shuts down traffic, and they have to shut down water for the housing or in the vicinity, and they replace the unit that just busted. In Israel, the drones identify that before the leaks happen. And on average in the US, maybe some professors here would know better, I believe the leak rate is around 15%, the average in the US, is that right? Depending which city you're in, some are more. If you go up to Chicago, where the infrastructure is much older, you have a larger leak rate. There are cities around the world, like Cairo, I was just told yesterday, 60% leak rate. In Israel, because of these new technologies, there's a number of cities that have implemented that drone technology was recently implemented in a number of cities. This is one of these startup companies that was supported by the government. They've implemented it in a couple of cities, I think Lanana and I can't think of the other one. They're down to 6%. 6% leak rate. There's all sorts of these technologies that Israel is now producing. Israel and its private sector companies are producing and taking around the world. And I think this is something absolutely remarkable because, again, think about that, what the country started with. Israel today, this is a chart I found I thought was really interesting in terms of where Israel got its water resources. And you can see this blue, that's all this brackish water, because in Israel, I mean everything was kind of saline. Whether it's coming from the Jordan River or coming from the aquifer, it was all sort of sailing to some different degree. But the diversification in terms of effluent, recycling, in terms of desalination, desalination of brackish aquifer, this is all becoming part of the picture today. And the projections in terms of the amount of water that Israel will be producing, if you could export water in bulk, which a few countries are doing now, but I mean Israel could be an exporter right now because it's producing more water than it needs. Again, well, let me go. Do you remember that photo I said keep in the back of your mind, the one with the sand and the tent city? The city is Hulon. This is where my grandmother lived. For many years. She moved to Israel, family moved to Israel in 1957. About 1957, 1958, on those sands, they started building, I guess the translation is projects. They're 4-story buildings. And there's a bunch of these 4-story buildings all over the place in this area of Hulon. No elevators, no air conditioning, and she got the top floor. I walked those stairs for many years, all the way to the top. Eventually she did get in air conditioning, a window unit in her bedroom, not the whole apartment. But that building was on the sand. It was just sand, building, sand, building. That was the late 50s. I remember late 60s. I was a little boy. I played in that sand. By then, they already had some sidewalks going between buildings and out to the main street. In the 70s, when drip irrigation really started to kick in Israel, we had trees and bushes, sand, sidewalks, and trees and bushes. 1980s, I remember, there were little stretches of grass, and it was about probably 3 by 3 foot, a meter square areas of grass, just a couple little places, drip irrigation. Today, there's no more sand. That's where the sand used to be. Israel started off with a population of hundreds of thousands. Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze. Today the population is 8.5 million. So much for the British projections of 1.8, 2 million people. They're living in a modern society simply because they've been able to produce water. And they've been able to create an environment that is just so unique in one of the harshest environments that you can imagine. And as I said, for me personally, growing up, going to some of these drilling sites with my father, and now, I guess in retrospect, thinking back, I mean, I'm just proud to have been, a small part of just hanging out with my father while he was doing this. So that's the story I wanted to relate, and I thank you for listening.